Welcome to the Pucks with Haggs podcast, a proud member of the CLNS Media Network. My name is Joe Haggerty. I am the host of Pucks with Haggs. Thank you for listening. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe and get yourself a premium membership. Get all of my NHL and Bruins writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also write columns 3 times a week for the Boston Sports Journal and do a weekly Q&A. With me this week is longtime friend and colleague Mick Colageo. Mick, please tell everybody where they can find your work.
Rink Rap, my blog, I link to it on X and Facebook, primarily at games, but I got a couple of missives that I am going to have some time later this week to get out there and playoff thoughts. And on the construction architecture of traditional Stanley Cup winners, and also my annual question, the emerging monkey wrench team of the playoffs.
The monkey wrench team of the playoffs. I like that.
I once threw this at Claude Julien. He was like, I think we can be the monkey wrench team of the playoffs. They were 2011. But yeah, that's about which team drives coaches into day-long meetings in their offices, reinventing basic systems, and everybody has to adjust to that team and how they play. In 2003, it was the Mighty Ducks. They didn't win it, but they came out of nowhere to force the Devils to 7.
Yep. And I think the last couple of years it's been the Florida Panthers with the forecheck and the way that they play. And
they're the team that makes everybody change how they play and against them, and influences how they want to try to play the next year against everybody else.
Yeah, no question. It's copycat league. They're the team that people have been copycatting. Even before they won the cup, I think people really liked when they got to the finals, really liked and appreciated the way that they played.
And what they find out, like the Bruins of the late 90s trying to parrot the Devils, is that you got to have the personnel.
Yes, no, 100%. You have to have people willing to play that way and wanting to play that way. For those of you listening to this episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like, and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS, enjoying all this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. There's also the CLNS Media Network and Patriots Press Pass YouTube channels, so check them out as well. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the very instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interwebs. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. As I said, I believe this is the 189th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, so we're going to jump in just with getting caught up to date with the current goings-on in the Stanley Cup playoffs from a Bruins perspective. That means looking at the Bruins players, the ex-Bruins players, the recently ex-Bruins players that are still alive in the playoffs. Obviously, the headliner, and I wrote about him the other day, is Brad Marchand. He gets the overtime winner in Game 3 in Florida, big goal. Sort of your typical OT playoff winning goal where it's a lot of action at both ends, and then the puck bounces off somebody and goes in. But great play by him to throw it on net into traffic, a veteran move at that point. And I was surprised because he'd kind of been playing and put in a third line role with the Florida Panthers, which just tells you how deep the Florida Panthers are. But I was surprised when I looked at it. He's tied, I think, for the lead in scoring among the Panthers in these playoffs. I think it's 2 goals in 6 points, or maybe 8 points. I can't remember. It was one of the two. And he I've noticed as these playoff games have been going on, and especially as this Toronto series has been going on, he's been out there a lot more. And he's getting heavily and more deeply used by the Florida Panthers as they see the way that he plays in the playoffs and what he brings to the table. And really, it just shows you, Mick, what he can do when he's on a good team, how much is left in his tank, and just how great an acquisition that was by the Florida Panthers at the trade deadline to really help them try to get over the top and do what is incredibly difficult in the NHL, which is repeat as Stanley Cup champs back-to-back. But that trade, bringing him in, if they repeat and if they win again, could be a major, major factor in them repeating and giving them something they absolutely needed in these playoffs.
I think every team that wins the Stanley Cup needs to make a significant acquisition, whether they do it in the offseason, like the Philadelphia Flyers in 1974 acquiring Reggie Leach, and suddenly they had a guy who could fire in 40 something pucks. I know that in 76 he had 61 plus 19 in the playoffs, and was a Conn Smythe on the losing team. But you got to add something to your team. I thought the Boston Bruins in 2011 made a mistake by tinkering and not really going out and getting an offensive defenseman. Would have changed their team. They didn't have one. David Krejci and Patrice Bergeron had to play that role of coming all the way back and leaving points on the board that they could have if they started their games in the middle of the rink instead of all the way back being that guy 2/3 of every game. That was them. And the Bruins wanted Cabriolet to be that guy. He wasn't up to that, but he was a pretty good third pairing guy for them, despite how much he was like, oh God, why did we get him? He was actually good. And so I thought that the next year, the sequel season, they really needed a bona fide top four defenseman who could move the puck and improvise the breakout. And they didn't get it. And Torrey Krug obviously came along. Wade Redden was the guy prior to, and he got hurt, and that opened a spot for Krug in 13, and Krug never looked back. So, I just think that teams that win the cup, it's so hard, like you said, to get back there. You got to do something to your club. The Florida Panthers identified Marchand as being that guy, and kudos to them. I mean, I said to Bill Zito in the elevator late in the season when he came into Boston, I said, congratulations on the acquisition. And he said, Nico Sturm's a hell of a player. So,
that's
well
funny.
played.
In this business that we're in, you don't root for teams, but you do root for individuals. You find yourself doing that, especially people you've come across that you enjoy, that you built a relationship with, that you just like the way that they go about their business and the way they do things. And just seeing Marchand and seeing the joy that he has right now playing in that kind of environment. And let's face it, like, I think the Bruins did him a real solid trading him there. They didn't have to trade him there when they decided that they were going to move him. They could have tried to trade him somewhere else and get the most value that they could have. I think that was the one place he wanted to go. And I think they did him a solid, even though he didn't want to get traded and he didn't want to go anywhere. When they both agreed that it wasn't going to happen contract-wise, they sent him to the one place he really wanted to go. So, it's been fun to watch him being a part of that and, being the player that he was and the difference maker he was in so many playoffs for the Boston Bruins. And he's a guy that you root for. Even if you're a Bruins fan, you can't root for the Florida Panthers. I think it's still pretty easy to root for Brad Marchand. And the one caveat to all that is you don't want there to be a Ray Bourque style Stanley Cup celebration in Boston if Marchand wins and brings the cup back here. Let's hope they don't. I don't think it will happen because it hasn't been that long since they won a cup. That was an interesting circumstance with Bourque and him bringing the cup back and how long it had been since the Bruins had won the cup. But it could be akin to Bruce Cassidy bringing the cup back to Cape Cod and hanging out here locally. And, I can't imagine the Bruins love that, but it's, that's part of it.
Yeah, that I think the one with Bruce Cassidy was kind of under the radar, even though people knew about it. And so it was a topic, but it was kind of like, hey, how many players and coaches vacation on Cape Cod? And if you have any connection to the Boston Bruins or you're from this area and you played for another team, I bet the Stanley Cup has been on Cape Cod every summer for the last 50 years. So one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to some other players. Trent Frederick got in a fight in the Edmonton series. He took the brunt of that fight. He was fighting Nicholas Hagg, who's a big dude. He's like 6'6", 6'7". Good tilt, heavyweights.
He's got the decisive grip on the sweater. It reminded me when Kyle Clifford and Kevin Miller dropped him, and Clifford went right over in front and pulled down, and Miller could never, ever get his right going, and Clifford decisioned him just because of that one first move. The grappling part of it is a big part of the fights based on however they're making the jerseys under the current contract.
Yeah. 1 goal, 3 points for Frederick in these playoffs, 10 minutes a night, roughly, basically playing a fourth line role. I mean, when you look back on it now, the value they got for Frederick based on him being hurt and then, being a fourth liner in Edmonton when he did get healthy, like that was a great trade for the Bruins. They got a lot of value for a player that did not have a great season.
Well, I think the thing with the Bruins is they're looking and saying, okay, what are the next 5 years of Freddie going to be for us?
Yeah.
And what they had in mind when they drafted him late first round was a third line center who could be a beast, who could be all of those kind of Marchand type of elements, Charlie Coyle type elements, grow his game, be his own guy, but be some sort of taking things from those guys and building his game. And Monty totally saw him as a winger. He had good stretches to his game here, but then he had stretches where he just seemed lost and searching and hesitant and trying to think too much and not play enough. And it just, I don't know. I just found it to be a very distracting season for him, a distracted season with UFA on the cusp of UFA. And so for him to get moved, I think the Bruins, I hate seeing a player like that. The idea of Trent Frederick is always so appealing. And I knew it'd be a market for him because teams look across and they see the green grass on the other side of the fence. And the blades line up and it's all green and you're not looking straight down and seeing the holes. And the idea of Trent Frederick is a popular one. And so it seemed like the right move. And the Bruins, once even ahead of the deadline, they're considering the market. And they're saying, okay, what's the market? This is the market. We got to do these things now and move our team forward. And I think it was the right thing. As much as I hate to see him go, I really like Freddie. And so hopefully he flourishes and finds a new voice, a new context, a new room, new teammates. He made a beautiful headman pass for a breakaway in their last game. So, and they look like they're poised and ready to take another step here.
Yeah, they do. And he will flash and he'll either get in a fight or make an offensive play every once in a while, but just not, I think, consistently enough to get a big contract now, to really take advantage of the spot that he's in. And really the role that he's playing in Edmonton might be what he is moving forward for whatever team he goes to, kind of a fourth line center forward, big body, physical, we'll have upside in a fourth line role. Ideally you want guys like that, that are fourth liners that can also occasionally put the puck in the net and have the capability of getting a double-digit goals, all that stuff. But once he's out of the Bruins sphere of the team that invested the first round pick in him and had a vested interest in him developing into a higher end player, or a player where they kind of justified their pick that they made for him, I feel like he's not going to be playing as big. The role he's playing now in Edmonton is probably the role he's going to be playing wherever he goes at this point, just based on what he's done in the league and his skill set.
I think it might have been come to a head with the Bruins this year. Besides the contract, it might have come to a head anyway.
No, I think
because this was the season that was the golden opportunity for him to take a step forward in his career and mitigate some of the problems the Bruins were having up front. And this would have been a great year for him to have a year like Morgan Geekie wound up having. And had he taken steps forward in his own role to just be the best version of himself and be an abiding presence, and for the Bruins to look at him like a core guy, then maybe they would have thought differently about his next contract. As it so happened, this was the last year, and they knew that they weren't going to pay market to discourage him from going on the open market with the kind of season he had still meandering.
No. And, it'll be interesting to see where he goes in the offseason. We all thought, or I thought at least, that St. Louis was a very strong possibility in reuniting with Monty. We'll see if that ends up happening with him in free agency. Brandon Carlo playing on the back end for the Maple Leafs against the Florida Panthers. It's been fun to watch Carlo and Marchand going at each other a little bit in some of these games, just based on the positions that they play and naturally, being out there fighting against each other during shifts. 19 or so minutes a game. A -1, steady, but basically playing kind of a, number 4, number 5, number 6 sort of role on their back end, killing penalties. bringing to the table what they really needed. And he's been pretty good. I think he's been solid and steady for the Leafs, and hasn't been a guy that I've looked at and seen making a lot of mistakes. So, and for a Leafs team that's played pretty well. So it's been a decent postseason so far for Carlo.
I've watched stretches of games where he looked pretty solid. I do feel like, in a team like Toronto with so much talent and so many guys who can touch the puck on its way from one end of the rink to the other, that there's no pressure on him to be an influencer, more of a guy who just moved the puck from point A to B or B to C, maybe C to D in some situations, depending on where you are and what the deal is. But it's just kind of like be you, be the best version of you. He's a stick first guy, even though he's big and rangy, and he does push back, but I don't know. I feel like he probably could get a little more physical and a little more body and a little less with his, little less dependent on his long stick when the play is around his own net.
Absolutely. All right. Let's remind everybody, let's take a break from this podcast and remind everybody that for those of you listening to this episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like, and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS and enjoying all of this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. There's also the CLNS Media Network and the Patriots Press Pass YouTube channels as well. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interwebs. All right, let's get back into the show. All right, Mick, we're going to answer some fan stuff here. This one we touched on a little bit, I want to say, in the last episode, but we're going to delve into it again because I don't think you got to give your take on this. This is from Brian, a loyal reader on my Pucks with Haggs Substack, who sent in this question and a fan of the podcast, so thanks for that, Brian. He says, do you think the Bruins should offer sheet Matthew Knies, want no part of Mitch Marner? And I can understand this. Mitch Marner is going to get a huge contract, probably max years, 10, 11, $12 million, something like that. Like, he's going to get big money either from the Leafs or from somewhere else. And, he doesn't play center. He's a winger, but he's a line driving winger, kind of a la Pasternak. It would be really interesting dynamics wise with the team if they spent a lot of money on Marner and had these two sort of, finesse wingers that were driving the top two lines with secondary presences at center. Matthew Knies, what is he, 22, 23? He's young. He's having a great season. I think he got close to 30 goals this year. 6'3", 6'4", 220, big guy.
Beautiful skater.
Big winger, great skater, plays physical, has an edge to his game. I really like him a lot. And I think the RFA and the offer sheet thing, Mick, is really interesting. And it's something that we haven't talked about a lot with the Bruins, but I think the door has opened a little bit after St. Louis signed a couple of Edmonton RFAs when the Oilers were up against the cap last year, where teams might be able to use this. And this might be a little bit more of something that a team can do. The problem is, or the challenge is, it's not going to be like last year with Edmonton because the cap is going up. And I think teams aren't going to be quite as strapped to the cap and forced to give up on an RFA rather than sign them, like when St. Louis had Edmonton over a barrel last year, where they weren't able to retain those two players and, basically had to let them sign with St. Louis. But the Bruins are in a prime position right now. They have all their picks. So they have their first and their third round pick for the 2026 draft, which would be 4.5, the offer sheet, 4.5 million to 6.8 million. The compensation is the first and the third round pick. So I think if you're going to sign Matthew Knies to a contract, it's going to be in that 4.5 to 6.8 range, based on he's coming out of his entry level deal. Yes, he's had a good year, but it's been one good season. He's not going to be getting $10 million a year or something like that on this second contract. It's going to be more in that 6.5 probably range, 6 to 6.5 you would expect.
Well, if you really
And
want the player and you're going to be on the upper end of the range, wouldn't you jump to the low end of the next range so that you could up the compensation?
You maybe, and you'd have to give up another pick, but like they have all their picks, so they would be able to do it. It's funny, I don't remember this, but they got their own pick back in the Lauco deal from Minnesota, which isn't going to factor into the compensation, but it was them acquiring one of their picks for this 2026 draft. So they basically, I think they're missing one pick, but aside from that, they have all the picks they would need to give as compensation, and they have extra second rounders. They've got extra first rounders. They've beefed up on all the draft picks that they have based on the trades that they made at the trade deadline. So they've really fortified themselves and put themselves in a position where there's a lot of options. And if they wanted to sign somebody to an offer sheet and give up some of their draft picks as compensation, they have extra draft picks, and it would be no problem at all. This is really the perfect position. If the Bruins are ever going to offer sheet somebody, given the salary cap space that they have, given the salary cap going up, given that they have all their draft picks, now would be the time to go after a guy like Matthew Knies, and I think he would be a really good fit with the Bruins.
I think the problem with that is the Toronto Maple Leafs would probably be one of the teams that would say, we're going to do whatever we can to make the moves we got to make to keep this player.
Yeah.
And we're going to show the league. Yeah. We're going to show the league that we're not going to let you do that. We're not going to let you leverage us into losing our guy. I think that's going to be the stance with this particular player. I think if the Bruins are going to be successful, given the fact that the cap is going up these next couple of years and going to hit $100 million in a couple of years, that what's going to really happen in the league landscape is that there are going to be smaller market teams that are going to have to make decisions not to try to keep pace and live at the top of a cap world. We're going to come back to being a pre-salary cap type structure for finances in the NHL, where teams are going to be in lower stratospheres out of their own budgetary situations, and those are going to be the teams that are going to have the bullseye.
Yeah. So you pick off RFAs on smaller market teams that have a budget and are not going to be able to spend up to the cap.
I mean, that's going to be the ones that you can leverage.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that certainly could become a dynamic that we start to see moving forward, where there will be haves and have-nots with the salary cap going up so much, and some franchises, some organizations probably just not having the wherewithal financially to be able to spend all the way to the cap. So it's not even going to be a salary cap ceiling situation or issue. It's going to be a budgetary issue with the amount of money that they can spend or want to spend. I think that's a good point, and I think that probably you're right.
It ain't my point originally. It wasn't my idea. The first time I heard somebody mention this was on 32 Thoughts with Elliot Friedman said it.
That makes sense.
He thinks that we're going to come back to, actually what he did do was say that Colorado made a decision on Rantanen that may be an indicator of what they think about their own economics going forward over the next several years. And that they weren't, it wasn't a referendum on the player. It was a referendum on their organization and their financial limitations. And if Denver becomes one of these markets, if the cap goes up and they can't go with it, then what's going to happen to the Avalanche?
No, that's interesting. If there's a team that would be able to circle the wagons money-wise and keep whatever they want reasonably, it would be the Leafs. But, if you up the offer a little bit, that might make it harder given some of the money that they're spending on other players, especially if they do end up potentially like retaining Marner too. There's only so many players you can start, paying $11, $12 million where it's going to affect
Marner made such a great play in one of the games in Florida, not the last one, but the one before it, where they thought they had like an F1 and F2, and they thought they were going to trap him behind his net and take the puck away and knock him off. Right, left, and he shook them all off. It was just amazing. And then he gives the puck off to one of the Ds, and they're having a harder time trying to shake off the aftermath of that forecheck than what Marner was doing at the height of it. So that kid is lights out with the puck on his stick and his ability to move. Reminds me a little bit of Sergei Samsonov.
Yeah, no, he's always been like that. And, he's better defensively than he's sometimes given the reputation for being. I will, and he certainly has become a little bit of a lightning rod in for criticism in Toronto. He seems to be the guy that a
They
lot of
got to have
times
one.
gets things pointed at him, but like extremely good player, very elusive, very creative, like does some amazing things from a skill level point of view. Just watching him and being a fan of the game, like he is as skilled as they get, and a very like smart, like instinctual offensive player. So yeah, I think all of that is interesting, and I think the point that you're making is very interesting too. That Toronto might not be the team that you're going to be able to pick on salary cap wise, but we'll see. I mean, we'll see what kind of situation they're in, what happens with Marner, and if you at least try to take a flyer on a guy like Knies, because I like Knies as a player. I think he would be great.
He's
in the
easy
Boston
on the
Bruins
eyes.
uniform.
I mean, he's like Pavel Zacha with maybe a tad more speed and just lots of results.
Yeah, and a little more FU to his game too, I think, than Pavel Zacha has.
Perhaps.
Knies,
I mean,
Knies
Zacha's
definitely
got a
has.
lot of great second, third effort stuff, but he's also a Lady Byng candidate.
Yep. All right. This one is there's a multiple questions here, Mick. So bear with me on this, but I thought this was pretty good. So this is from Daniel Jerome from the Boston Sports Journal Q&A. Hi, Joe. A couple questions and thoughts. One of the things I don't see talked about in college hockey is how some rinks are Olympic or close to Olympic size. I grew up playing on Mullins practice rink at UMass, and both the practice rink and the main rink there are the international standard. I'm curious if you know if this is part of the pitch to European players who are interested in the NCAA. That'd be an easier transition to the North American rink size because more than 50% of your games are on the larger rink size. Any thoughts on 50%? That, Mick?
50%?
Yeah, that seems high. I'm not sure that there's
UNH famously had an Olympic style rink, and we still call it Olympics. But how many Olympics in the last 20 years have been played on Olympic sheets? I mean, for the most part, you got to go to Spangler or at least the Worlds to get the big fat rink. The rinks aren't any longer for those at home who might not know this, but the Olympic size rink, I guess, was 98 wide and 200 feet long. The NHL, 85. And all of that space is outside the dots. The grid doesn't change. The circles are still the same width going down the rink. The dots are still the same width. It's the space on the outside. So I had a great conversation with this when this was a hot topic in the 90s with Ray Bork. And I said, Ray, there's been a lot of talk that people want to see bigger rinks in the NHL and think that would open up the game. But that's not, how come all the stats are down in European hockey? How come they don't score as much? And I said, I watched those 98 Olympics and I really wasn't impressed with speed. And he goes, they don't use it to skate. They use it to hide.
Yep.
And so it's a possession game because let's face it.
It almost turns into more of like a soccer game. Where
precisely. You're going to a game, if you're going to play pond hockey, you're out in a pond and there's 5 games going on and it's a half a mile across the rink and across the pond. And the puck leaves your game and it goes way out there and it's a hotly contested game. What does everybody do? Do they run out there and chase that puck and contest it? No, they catch a breather and they wait near their own net and make sure that all there's here. That's what open space does. The best rink ever for a hockey game, in my opinion, was Boston Garden because it was uniquely thin. It was 83 feet wide. It was short, the 191, not the shortest. Detroit and Chicago had shorter rinks, but Boston actually had the only rink in the NHL when standardized rinks were, if you go back to the 1950s, rinks were not standard. And in fact, when Pittsburgh Penguins in Civic Arena, AKA the Igloo, the original rink in that arena was 205 feet long. And
was it really?
Yeah. So when I went to the 2008 finals, jumped on a plane with Kevin DuPont and Bob Newmeyer, and through a thunderstorm, we went to Pittsburgh. I went to Game 3, and they gave me a beautiful seat. I'm sitting right up there with all the Canadian guys in the row there. Just gorgeous view of the game. I'm thinking, like, I can't believe this. But before the game, I went down to see the Bull Gang because I wanted to find out about the rink. Because remember this when I was a kid. Bobby Orr had like a ton of room behind the net. That's where all the space was. And so I went down there and I saw that there was in the floor, there were these giant beams and they were about 3 feet back of the end boards and they were in the shape of the hockey rink. And I said, And I said to the bull guy, "Is this the bull guy? Is this where the rink used to be?" And he just nodded, "Yep." And I'm like, "Yes, I knew it. Because it was 2.5 feet because the overall was 205.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It was just a strange. If you look at any old Bobby Orr highlights and you see them playing at Pittsburgh, watch when the puck goes by the net, how big that rink was.
That's funny. That's interesting. I love that stuff. I will say, you do notice a difference just watching games up close in person when it's the rink is wider, the Olympic sheet. There's no doubt about it that it makes a huge difference in the game. And there is an adjustment for European players when they're coming to North America and they're playing in smaller rinks. There's no just players being on top of them much quicker, them having to make, quicker, faster decisions, move the puck faster, all that stuff.
When Aganis was built on Com Ave for BU, that's a hybrid width. I think it's 90. So at that time that rink was built, hybrid was all the rage. There was a lot of contemplation that maybe the NHL would consider the hybrid width because it wouldn't be wide enough to get coaches to change their systems and back off and protect and trap and slow the game down. But it might be just wide enough to stress defensemen trying to protect the outside, open up the inside without changing the game fundamentally. And they thought that there was so much talk in the 1990s about how do we fix hockey.
All right, here's number 2 from this email. I have a trade proposal rolling around that I think is less likely now since the Islanders got the first overall pick, but I'd like your thoughts. To Boston, Matthew Barzal, Noah Dobson, Anthony Duclair, 50% salary retained. To the New York Islanders, a 2026 first, a 2026 third, a 2027 first, Casey Middlestat, Matt Patra, and Fabian Lysell. The thought is the Bees have a plethora of potential middle six center prospects, and all of them. Patra is the least likely to be able to play on the wing, ditto for Middlestat. If you're hoping to draft a top six center of the future with your first in the 2025 draft, Barzal could play center for the next year or two and then move to right wing behind Pasta when that center is ready. If you can re-sign Dobson to a deal around 8x8, you'd have a great 1-2 punch on right D for years with him and McAvoy. Getting Duclair would be buying low on a distressed asset, unlikely to move the needle much, but a good veteran presence on the third, fourth line. I'd consider changing the third for another first if the former wouldn't be enough to get the deal done. I know it's a huge trade, but if the team's serious about competing again within the next year or two, it'd be a much safer bet than drafting and developing, albeit not as sustainable long-term. My first thought immediately would be, I don't like the idea of the Bruins trading first-round picks and all of these picks that they've amassed for a bunch of players on a team that didn't make the playoffs and ended up getting the first overall pick. I understand that there seems to be an ongoing thing with Don Sweeney acquiring first-round picks from that 2015 draft. That they missed on or they did not get. And Matthew Barzal would be like the biggest name that they missed on and didn't get as he was picked right after them.
Who was on the board, right? Famously next.
Yes. But I don't like this trade scenario because I just don't think this is the right move for the Bruins as far as successfully and correctly retooling and doing it the right way. I feel like this would be adding a bunch of veteran players and continuing to do what got them into the position that they're in right now and that they need to kind of get out of a little bit.
From a hockey standpoint, Barzal's career in recent years has been underwhelming, and I don't think the Islanders would subscribe to 50% retention in order to offload him. If the Bruins think he's good enough to be a bridge player for them, then the Islanders are going to feel the same, and they're the ones who drafted him. So I don't. That doesn't really ring my bell. I feel like now between him and Lindholm, you have two guys who haven't really lived up to what they're purported to be. So I'd rather just live with the one and let him find his way while I figure out what else I'm going to do rather than acquire another asterisk. Secondly, I'm not sure how I feel about Dobson. I love the Islanders D back when they were conference finalists in 2021. They still have Pellick and Pulak from that era. And Mayfield, I know, is still in the program. But but his presence has been a little less. Pesci went to Carolina. That was a great get by them. That really eroded the Islanders' ability to be what they had been. That was a tough loss for them, Brett Pesci. So Dobson has come along and trying to add a little more offensive flavor to their lineup and be more dynamic back there. But at the end of the day, they've become a porous club. They're not what they were. And I don't think that I'm not saying that that's all on him, but I am saying that I'm not convinced in him as a player yet. So I guess I would need to feel more strongly about him. And I'm not saying I've watched him enough to really know, but the concept is quite compelling. I like how the thoughts are constructed here. It's an aggressive move in a very subtle way, but there's a few hurdles there that I don't think that I would want to cross, nor would I think the Islanders would.
Yeah, I just think from a philosophical perspective, I just don't like them trading away more first-round picks when they've worked this hard to acquire all these first-round picks and second-round picks.
You better be hitting a grand slam if you do.
For a deal like this, you have to get players that are going to move the needle if you're going to trade those picks
really sure.
and bring in a veteran guy. And I'm just not sure a bunch of players from the Islanders team that was no good this past year is going to move the needle in that way, even though I do like Dobson. I think Dobson would be a good player for them. I like him as a defenseman. He's probably the player I would like the most out of all those players mentioned in the trade, but I just don't think you do all this to get a Noah Dobson. All right. Question number 3. Do you think they'll try to sign Sean Carali to a 2 or 3 year deal for a veteran presence on the fourth line? He's spoken glowingly about his time in Boston during his time with the Blue Jackets. No, I don't think so. I don't think they're going to sign anybody that's going to be a fourth liner to a 2 or 3 year deal. I don't think that's been Don Sweeney's style since he's taken over here. I think there's definitely a lot of turnover in those fourth line kind of players. He was a good player when he was here. I certainly don't think he was a great fourth line player, and he's not somebody that I feel like they need to go out and get now. I think that if they were going to get somebody like that, they need to get somebody younger or somebody that's a lot tougher and more physical than Sean Carali to play that kind of role.
I get the leadership end of it. Carali really matured in Columbus, and I felt like he pushed forward his career and in his role. But the Bruins' MO in the Don Sweeney era has been to let the fourth line be the revolving door through which the team eases its stress on cap compliance. They've farmed up to the NHL. There are so many guys who played in larger roles, making more money, who started out in Boston's fourth line over the past 15 years. Noah Lachari, Thomas Nosek. Hey, Brad Marchand just gave him a puck after a playoff game. Jesper Boqvist went to that team as well. There's a lot of teams that see value in the Bruins fourth liners, and the Bruins are the guys who are getting these guys and establishing them in those roles. They've been good at it. They've done it on the cheap. I don't see them changing the way they do it.
No, and they've also invested in Marcus Stelic too, who I'm sure they view as probably like a fourth line guy that's going to play in that role for a while, and I think brings what they want a fourth line guy to bring to the table, more than Carali would, and he's doing it for really short money. Like the only reason I think he signed the contract he did, or the Bruins signed him to that, is like 1 point something million. It's term,
and he got term. Player got term. The Bruins got cap hit.
Very affordable for a fourth line kind of player that they're going to rely on. I mean, everybody obviously hopes the concussion stuff is in the past for him, and that it turns into like a life lesson about not, pushing himself to play through like when something doesn't feel right.
Every era has a new guy who goes through that, and you know what? It's important that they manage these people because these guys want to play, and you got ultra competitive guy. That's why you want him on your team. And I told the first half of the season, Kastelik in my mind was the 7th player award clubhouse leader. And he got nowhere near it because his season fell apart with the head injuries. So it's really, and it was obvious
watching him play that something wasn't quite right. He wasn't the same player in the second half of the year that he was in the first half of the year because of that. So
it was the John Moore contract he's got now. So
he comes back.
Hopefully he can live up to it better than Moore did here.
Plays hard-nosed, hits, is occasional offensive player, like has a little bit of skill that will give you a little bit from the fourth line role, stands up for his teammates, like plays with a lot of energy and emotion. Like he's exactly the kind of player that the Bruins want on the fourth line. So I don't think there's any need for a player like Carali because you have Kostelic and because they also sort of cycle through a lot of guys in that sort of role. All right, number 4, do you think the NHL will ever limit no movement clause or no trade clauses? Obviously, the players would fight any limit on them, but so many players have them that it's really limited trade possibilities around the league. Seems like if you limit them to 2 to 4 of each per team, they'd be considered more valuable and give teams more flexibility in potential trades. It's interesting, but I think the NHL is not going to want to have to give up whatever they're going to get. Getting this in exchange, I don't think it's going to be worth it for them because you know how it goes in collective bargaining between the NHLPA and the NHL. If the NHL was going to get something like this, a limit per team as to how many no move clauses you can give out, they're going to have to give up something they're probably not going to give up, like, you know, fiscally or otherwise.
If only virtual players had a union in fantasy hockey. But this is clearly a fantasy hockey question because I want my players, I want them now, and why can't we move these guys?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You know what? I think that the NHL has the right mixture here, and the reason is, as much as that can be frustrating in particular situations, I also think that, and from the widest philosophical perspective, take the whole panorama right now and say, do you want the NHL to be a hodgepodge of 32 teams that you don't know who's on who every 1 week to the next? You've got to have teams desperate for identity, branding, connection with their fans. We're a family, all of that stuff. If you can't give team players security, then you can't have that dynamic in your league and with franchise to franchise. And one thing I've always noticed, regardless of whether these are expansion teams, southern teams, non-hockey markets, yada, yada, the fans who connect to those teams are connected for life.
Yep, I agree. Number 5, curious if you also noticed that halfway through the season, Swayman significantly reduced the amount of times he'd try and handle the puck. Assume this was goalie Bob telling Swayman to focus on stopping the puck. He had a significant amount of mishandles in the first half of the season when he was more active. I just think it's not a strength of his. So like anybody was going to tell him he needed to stop trying to do too much with the puck at certain times. And I think it was probably natural for him to try to do more with the puck because of the situation that was going on around him, with so many grade A chances coming in, with the defenseman struggling, with everything that was going on. He's trying to do too much. And that was probably also natural signing the contract that he signed, that he was going to try to do too much and maybe try to play the puck as much as Linus Ullmark did, who was much better as far as playing the puck and being able to do certain things with it, I think, than Swayman is. Just a different kind of goalie. I didn't notice
his name was on the tip of my tongue too.
Yeah, I didn't notice that he was handling it significantly less in the second half, but I think it doesn't surprise me if he was, because I don't think it's a strength of his game.
I think he's jealous that Linus scored a goal.
Maybe.
I mean, let's face it. How many times the teams pulled the goalie and Swayman was trying like hell to get that look, trying to figure out, can I get one there? And so I think there's a little footnote to it as well.
And there was one time where it really burned them during the season when he did that too, if I remember correctly. There was one game late where he looked like he was trying to score and it ended up like backfiring.
Linus's own remarks after he did score were to that effect that, did you know that when you let that puck fly that it was aiming right at the net? And he said, I was afraid that it got blocked and that they were going to score on me.
Right.
He didn't know from the reaction until the dust settled that he had scored.
Yep. Good, interesting observation, though. Number 6, this is the last one. Lastly, any favorite prospects for the number 7 pick? It seems like Jake O'Brien might be the right choice as of now. Thanks. Yeah, Jake O'Brien, I think, is the one that's coming on. Playmaker, power play guy, definitely seems like high-end offensive center prospect. It seems like he's climbing up the boards. I still think it's telling that Don Sweeney went to go see Roger McQueen play out in the WHL, the 6'5" center, who's probably the highest risk player because he missed so much of this year with a back issue.
He'll be the one,
which is also, I think, a little concerning. For an 18-year-old kid to have a back injury like that. where he missed most of the season.
Let's see how many mock drafts send him to Boston.
Yeah. I think there's a number of different players. Once you get beyond the first couple of players, the top two picks there, that Misa and Schrader, however you say his last name, the defenseman, it seems like there's a lot of differences of opinion about how it's going to go and who's going to get taken where, which tells you that a lot of these players are in the same sort of pool. So it'll be interesting to see. I think NHL.com had the Bruins, both their writers in the mock draft had the Bruins taking that Porter Martone, the big power forward kid who plays a little bit with an edge and is a big body winger, which could be an interesting pick too, instead of going for the center if you go for that kind of a player, which they could definitely use as well. I think if Haggs is there, if he somehow drops to them, they would definitely take him. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, but it's really hard to say exactly who they're going to take or who's going to be there.
It's not a draft where one or two players really pops out and everybody knows, okay, if this guy gets taken, then this happens. Right. I don't think it's going to be like that. I think it's going to be more one of those drafts where there's going to be a lot of speculation as to who a team is interested in. And then when they pick their player, they're going to do their post-pick interview and say, this is the guy we had our eye on the whole time.
Yeah, we wanted this guy all along.
Right. Yeah, I think I wish I had a buck for every time a team said that, after it was quite debated as to who they were going to grab. So I don't know enough about these players to make any intelligent remark other than I do think that the Bruins are looking at this draft in a way that whoever they get is going to need enough time that there's very little point to them picking by position. It should be according to the team player that they think is going to be the best NHLer.
Yeah, that's their general.
So much of their team could change between now and the time that player makes his impact.
That's the general approach to the draft that they usually employ, but I just think they need some centers. They need a number one center, and they need somebody, and they're still gonna. I don't see how that's gonna get solved any other way except for drafting that guy. And the only way you draft that kind of a player is by taking a top 10 pick. And I really think just by virtue of the pick that they have and where they are in the draft, I think that kind of nudges them to have to pick a center here rather than go, best player available or whoever they think they like the most. I put it this way. I don't think it's going to cause them to not draft a player they love. Like if they love somebody and this is who they were hoping was going to be there, then they'll probably take that player. But if it's like a tie situation or a jump ball situation between two players, I think they would take the center over like a defenseman.
Yeah, if there's a lack of consensus.
I think that's where they would lean for sure.
Right.
All right, Mick, thank you very much for joining us. Everybody else out there, thank you for listening. And for those of you that are listening to this episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like, and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS, enjoying all of this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. There's also the CLNS Media Network and Patriots Press Pass YouTube channels as well. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interwebs. Mick, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Joe.
Everybody else out there, thank you for listening. We'll see you at the rink.